Welcome to Black History Matters 2022, presented by the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum, also known as NAHOF, located in Peterborough, New York. Black History Matters is an educational series that seeks to highlight historical events in the Black American experience. This series consists of 28 videos that NAHOF will release daily through the month of February 2022. Videos are viewable on NAHOF's website. The mission of the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum is to honor anti-slavery abolitionists, their work to end slavery, and the legacy of that struggle, and strive to complete the second and ongoing abolition, the moral conviction to end racism. This program was funded in part by Humanities New York, with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Jeffery McArn. Jeffery McArn has been Hamilton's college chaplain since 1996, when he was ordained as a minister in the Presbyterian Church. He has also served as summer minister for a small church on Grindstone Island in St. Lawrence River since 2005. A native of Laurinburg, North Carolina, Jeff is a graduate of Davidson College and Harvard Divinity School. Jeff works with both the Protestant chapel community and the interfaith community on campus, and he also works in local community outreach initiatives and service learning with the Hamilton College Coop. Jeff has taught classes on the art of listening, conflict resolution, and 1968. He currently teaches American freedom and religious thought. Please note that this is part 2 of a 2-part series. In order to catch up with what's going on in the video, please make sure to check out our previous video on Bob Moses. Part 1 of this series was published on February 17th and is available on our YouTube channel. I'd like to invite Jeffery McArn to continue with his presentation.
So during this march, which occurred on March 27th, 1963, police unleashed attack dogs on the 100 or so marchers. Bob Moses was attacked, receiving a long gash in his trousers from one of the dogs. Marian Wright Edelman, who witnessed the scene on that day, wrote about it later. I had been with Bob Moses one evening, and dogs kept following us down the street. Bob was saying how he wasn't used to dogs, and that he wasn't brought up around dogs, and he was really afraid of them. Then came the march, and the dogs growling and the police pushing us back, and there was Bob, refusing to move back, walking toward the dogs.
For us, the events in Greenwood represented a major breakthrough. For the first time, we had hundreds of people lined up at the courthouse in an effort to register to vote. We had gotten people off the plantations where they'd been strapped in the toughest way to economic poverty and the mores of segregation, and gotten them to come in and face the white man.
And what they had counted on was that we would never be able to actually involve the mass of the people in large numbers. They had counted on what they were calling apathy, that people were really satisfied with their present lot and they really couldn't get out in large numbers. And Greenwood just dispelled that. I mean, after Greenwood, nobody could say that the people were apathetic. They could say they were hungry, but they couldn't say they were apathetic. In exchange for a little bit of food, they were willing to risk everything they had, really, to go down and stand at the registrar's office and try to register and vote. Well, Mega came to Greenwood after Jimmy Travis was shot on the highway, just gunned down, and addressed the mass meeting there. And I remember how he spoke to the people when he said that Greenwood did something to him that made him feel that he needed to go back to Jackson and to really start working. That is, if people up in Greenwood could get themselves together and move in the way they had, then there was no excuse for Jackson, because Jackson, of course, had always been thought of as the leadership around civil rights in the States. So he went back determined to move Jackson. It was a man from Greenwood who went down and shot him. Byron de Beckwith, I think his name was. And for people in the movement, it was simply another in a long list of assassinations. I mean, what Amzie said was the modern form of lynching is the shooting. And that was what was happening. I mean, for Herbert Lee down in Amite County in 1960, the attempt on Jimmy Travis and myself and up in Greenwood in 1962 or 63, and then Mega. And then after Mega, there was Lewis Allen in 1960, early 1964. And then somewhere around in that time, we don't know when, 2 young students at Alcorn were murdered and buried. They were later uncovered when they were looking for the bodies of Mickey and Cheney and Goodman. So it was just a pattern of, if you can't stop them, try to kill off the leadership. Well, what happened was you had the staff on the one hand and then the people that we were working with on the other. The people, by and large, wanted the students to come back. Mrs. Hamer is an excellent case in point. She wanted the students to come back. We felt that we had to do something, and I felt that in that context that I had to step in between this loggerhead between the staff on the one hand and the people that we were working with. And so that's how the decision was made to actually invite the students down for the summer of '64. Well, we were at Oxford at the orientation, and Mickey Schwerner was at the orientation, and he took Andrew Goodman and James Cheney, who had been working with him. James was from Mississippi, back to Neshoba County to try and look for some housing for volunteers, because he had been recruiting volunteers. And what we heard was that they had been arrested by the sheriff in Neshoba County, and then we heard that they had been taken out of the jail. If, in fact, anyone is arrested and then taken out of the jail, then the chances that they're alive was just almost zero. And we had to confront the students with that before they went down, because they now had, the ball game was changed. I mean, whatever they thought they were coming down to get into, they now knew what they were getting into, or they had to know what it was they were getting into. So we talked to them about the fact that as far as we could see, all of them were dead, and that they had to make a decision now as to whether they really wanted to carry through on this and go down. And then we left them. We sang a couple of songs.
Bob Moses, the magnificent leader of the orientation and of so much of the work in Mississippi, got up at the point when we got the word in that gathering and stopped things and told these hundreds of predominantly white young people who had come to do what they felt was good, necessary, citizenship kind of work there in Mississippi. Almost all of them had never been to Mississippi. He told them about the word that we had received. And he also told them that if any of them felt that at this point they needed to return home or to their schools, we would not think less of them at all, but would be grateful to them for how far they had come. But he said, let's take a couple of hours just for people to spend time talking on the phone with parents or whoever, whatever you need to do to try to make this decision and make it now. And what I found as I moved around among the small groups that began to gather together to help each other figure out what to do was that in group after group, people were singing, Kumbaya, come by here, my Lord. Somebody's missing, Lord. Come by here. We all need you, Lord. Come by here. And I could never laugh at kumbaya moments after that.
For a while I was worried because no one was leaving. But finally a few of them did leave. So I did think that the message had gotten through, because you couldn't think that all of those who came to that orientation session were prepared to face the actual murder of their fellow students. There wasn't one of our people who had not worked under conditions in which we were threatened to be killed. And so we weren't asking them to do something that we ourselves weren't willing to do. We weren't asking them, we weren't sending them someplace that we ourselves were not willing to go. We were asking them to come where we were and experience the conditions as we experienced them. And if they were willing to do that, fine. And if they weren't willing to do that, there was nothing to get, to make them go. There was no pressure that we had to make anybody go. The thing about it was that, and this was to me the key of surviving, was that sometimes you were in no danger, and sometimes you were in very real danger. And you can't live as though you're in very real danger every day, every minute, right? No one can survive like that, right? And the trick was to begin to understand those times when you were in very real danger, and how to move in those times, and also to take advantage of those times when you were not in real danger so that you could relax. But it is true that we were often in danger. In the summer of 1964, we held a convention of the Freedom Mississippi Democratic Party, and we had delegates from all across the state who for the first time were representing the people of Mississippi, all the people of Mississippi, in going to the National Democratic Convention to say that they wanted to be a part of the Democratic Party. What they felt, I believe, they believed that actually the Democratic Party would embrace them. Well, at the first meeting, when we were with Humphrey and Reuther and King and so forth, the question arose as to the delegation itself actually deciding whether it would agree with what was offered. And we agreed that anyone who wanted to talk to the delegation to persuade them should have access to them, but that the whole delegation should be able to sit down and listen through all the arguments. And so they set up a meeting at which all of the delegation was present, and the leadership of the civil rights movement, King, Farmer, the leadership of the National Council of Churches, the leadership of lawyers groups that have been represented in Mississippi, congressmen, senators, all these people came before the delegation to try to persuade them to accept the compromise, or the offer. I don't call it a compromise, but this offer of 2 symbolic seats. And the delegation rejected. Well, what I think the issue for our people certainly was a moral issue. It certainly is true that they were bringing to this country and to the Democratic Party as its major political institution a question of generations of black people who had been denied political process and who were now asking that they get it. What we liked about Mrs. Hamer was that she spoke from her heart, and she spoke about what was real to her from all of her experience. And even when she was thrown into the spotlight as a media person, she had matured enough so that she didn't change. She always spoke the same way. When she spoke at a small meeting in Mississippi, talking to people about what they had to do to get up and go register or anything, when she spoke at Atlantic City in front of national TV, she spoke the same way. And what came through always was her soul. And I think one of the most beautiful things about the movement in Mississippi was that it was such that it enabled a person like Mrs. Hamer to emerge. The delegation was different in two ways. One, it was black. The other, it represented rural people, people who were sharecroppers, people who had not been processed in the ways in which most delegates were processed. They had not been through book learning. What they knew about was life, and they had lived it to the full. And they knew about life in Mississippi and the relationship of the politics that they were trying to challenge to the lives that they lead.
When I was in college, I had a French professor who we did a lot of work in 20th century French lit, and I read a lot of Camus. And
that's interesting. That connection.
Picked it up again. I just finished while I was in jail this last time. I read Through the Rebel and The Plague again. And
where were you in jail then?
This was in Hattiesburg.
Just now?
Just about a week and a half.
Yes. So you read Camus in jail?
Yeah. The main essence of what he says is what I feel close to. Well, that it's important to struggle. That is the sense of working against some of these forces. That it's important to recognize in the struggle certain humanitarian value.
John Blyth. John Blyth was head of the philosophy department. So I was one of his better students, and I did very well in the logic course. And when I left, John actually called me and offered me a job to come back. So that was not something that I could consider. To come back as an assistant professor. I had gotten a master's at Harvard.
Okay, you called you from Harvard.
Yeah. John left Hamilton to take a job with the Depot Group. He got involved in program learning, and he actually, I think, had developed a programmed version of his logic textbook. And when we got into Mississippi, of course, literacy is the subtext around the right to vote. And we began working with people, sharecroppers, day laborers, looking at how to teach them to read. So I get in touch with John. I actually look him up, and I go to New York on one of my trips, and I talk to him about this problem. his literacy problem.
64 or?
It says 62. I asked John, I go to see him and ask him if he's interested in working with us to develop programming to teach literacy. And he is. And we devise a concept where John will work 50% time, his time, and come down and train some of the SNCC workers to develop the material.
In his commitment to the role of education in the quest for social justice, Bob Moses, having been awarded a MacArthur Genius Grant in 1982, founded the Algebra Project with a vision of raising the floor of mathematics literacy for all young people in the United States of America. This is one component of Bob Moses' lifelong commitment to education, starting with literacy to sharecroppers in Mississippi, to a firm mathematical foundation for kids in underserved school districts, and finally to a push for an amendment to our federal Constitution guaranteeing every citizen the fundamental right not only to vote, but also to a quality education.
So the federal district judge, Clayton, just had one question for me. Why is SNCC taking illiterates down to register to vote? So sharecropper illiteracy was the subtext of the right to vote. And sharecropper illiteracy is kind of, depends on the idea of sharecropper education, an idea which is alive and well in our country. The idea that you are pre-assigned work, and so you get the education for which you have been pre-assigned. Right? So that's the second issue that I want us to think about. The first is the issue of the right to vote, and basically what I think about that is the country needs an affirmative constitutional right to vote, right? What we have now is a negative right to vote. And I also think what the country needs is to elevate public school education to the level of the Constitution of the country. I think the country has an unannounceable education policy, which is that we run failing schools and we rescue different categories of students. So all of our programs, vouchers, ABC programs, magnet schools, charter schools, affirmative action, you name it, all of these programs rescue different categories of students from our failing schools. We have no policy to actually fix our schools.
Well, thank you for listening today to this remembrance of Robert Parris Moses. I hope he is as much an inspiration to you as he is to me and my colleagues here at Hamilton College. He was a relentlessly courageous fighter for equality in this democratic republic of ours. He clung to the value of the personhood of people you've never heard of and insisted on the brilliance of their leadership and to let their influence be felt. His brand of leadership is almost unheard of, working tirelessly and at great risk to elevate not himself, but that which is of central importance. And what is of central importance? This he learned from his mentors, Ella Baker and Amzie Moore. It's not about the attention of a public demonstration for individual accommodations. It's about the collective power of those who put their trust in the value of human beings who otherwise would be pushed aside by a society focused on the influence of wealth and the false superiority of cultural power. Bob Moses believed that education could change that dynamic. He believed in education as the bedrock of a democratic society. The last time he returned to this campus, he spoke in this chapel with a plea for Hamilton College to champion the push to create an amendment to our national constitution which would guarantee the right of every citizen of this country to a quality education. As an educational institution which bears the legacy of a great man like Bob Moses, it is my hope for Hamilton College that we help push forward this dream of Bob Moses. So Bob, if you're listening, maybe the same community which brought you Professor Hamlin to teach you French and Camus, and Professor Blyth to introduce you to philosophy, and Professor Richardson to connect you with Quaker spirituality and abroad programs in France and Japan, maybe Hamilton College can commit itself to working under your quiet leadership to infuse our Constitution with the power required to bring justice to this democracy, a society where all citizens, not just the chosen elite, have access to the transformative power of education. God bless you, Bob Moses.
Thank you, Jeff, for your contribution of this presentation. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, NAHOF has provided a reference list of sources to learn more about it in the video description box. Additionally, please help us by completing a brief survey available at the link on your screen and also on the video description box. Your feedback will help NAHOF receive funding and help plan future projects. Please contact NAHOF with any questions and if you're interested in learning more about the organization and its work. Once again, thank you, Jeff, for donating your time and contributing to this program, and thank you, the audience, for joining us on this educational journey, Black History Matters. We hope to see you at our next presentation.